Welcome, friends, to another episode of Auto Afflicted. I'm your host, Ali Goulet, and today we have this magnificent 1997 BMW E36. But as you can see, it's not just any old rusty E36 held together by duct tape. It's a freaking drift car. And we're here with Damian Garcia, and he's going to tell us all about it. Let's get into it. So Damian, I can see there's a lot going on with this car. Run us through the overview, how you got it, what's up with it, and what's so cool about it.
Well, I bought this car in California. I was on a thing called Driftweek down there for about a month and kind of really got the itch to get one of these bad Larrys. We brought it back up here, and unfortunately, within a week of having it, a guy pulled out in front of me and totaled the whole front end of the car. Everybody told me to throw it away. I had multiple shops check it out, and this is the whole front piece right here. This is a spray painted fender that we just threw on it. In the meantime, I have a full over fender wide body kit that's going on the car. So this is it's in its rough transitional stage. But yeah, so the front end was smashed. This is a different hood that my buddy had laying around since he was 17 years old and patinaed it himself when that was cool for the Stance boys to do. Yeah, this whole front end was smashed all the way back up into the strut tower. And so we actually just pulled it out with various tools, ratchet straps, whatever we got our hands on. Kind of got the front end straight. Did all the measurements from BMW as far as the geometry of how it should be set up, got it set up that straight, and then put in some weld reinforcements and a strut brace to kind of keep the front end structurally there when we're throwing it into corners really hard, because obviously this car gets beat on a lot. It obviously has a ton of front camber. I don't know if you guys watching, a lot of people think that camber is usually like a stance thing to kind of get the car lower so that you can tuck it, but if you don't know, for those of you who don't, basically what happens is when you have a drift car and you throw it into a corner, you have the roll center, which if the tire was straight and you threw it into the corner, then you would be on the edge of the tire when you're at the limit. And so you would be really hard to steer because the front end doesn't have a lot of grip. So when you have the camber like this and the car gets thrown into the corner and the tire rolls, then you have full patch. And so you can actually steer the car through the drift. Otherwise it gets a little bit squirrelier. So that's kind of a weird little tidbit into that. Whenever you see a car like that, people stop me all the time, every single day at the grocery store. Your front wheel's broken, your car's broken, I don't know if you should drive it. Moving into the rest of the car, the reason we didn't throw away this car is because I had bought it and it was fully caged. And so as you can see inside, the car came fully caged. It was one of the reasons that I bought it. I plan on drifting this at a lot of tracks that require a cage just because of high speed entries and yeah, going fast. This car came gutted as well, obviously, as you can see, for weight reduction. I daily this car. I have a 81 Corolla that's a fully gutted drift car build as well, and for some reason I like dailying these things. In the summer it'd be nice to have AC, but we don't have AC in this car. It's got this sunroof delete in here. Takes out a ton of weight from all of the stuff that comes with the sunroof. Got two Bride Lomax reps in here. They're Bride Canada, not Japan, so they're a replica of the real OG Brides, or Brid, however you want to say it. It came with these race quip harnesses, PMC chassis mount shifter that's tied into a ZF trans. So ZF, for those of you who don't know, the BMWs came with two different kinds of transmissions in the E36. There's the Getrag, and there's the ZF. The ZF is the stronger transmission. It came in the M series as well, and it is burlier for handling higher horsepower. So it's the one that you want if you're getting into these cars. Some of the 3 Series models, since this isn't an M, came with the Getrag, and apparently you can't put a ton of power through them. So kind of a big selling point for this car as well. It is a 2.8 liter naturally aspirated inline 6. The motor is called a M52 B28. It's a 2.8 liter. These motors are notorious for just being able to handle a ton of abuse. This car has 225,000 miles on it, and it shreds.
Good Lord, that's a lot of miles.
The car came with a 315 diff in it, which is a little bit closer to stock gearing for these cars as far as the rear end, the final drive. But we swapped it out for a 319 differential, which makes the wheels spin a lot faster, more immediately. It's funny, it's a crazy mod that you do to these cars, but they pick up a ton of power. They rip through the first 3 gears really, really hard. Now, the car does max out at 125 miles an hour in 5th gear at redline, which is not common. So it changes the gearing, but I have no desire to shred around going over 100. I'm not in my teens anymore.
Right, that's hooligan stuff,
Yeah,
right?
like you can go fast. You can go straight line in a fast car. Like that, it's just not impressive to me anymore. I'd rather be able to drift in 3rd gear because the gearing is a little bit shorter. This car, even with all the mileage and everything, we did a M50 intake manifold swap on it. That's a very common mod to gain actually 20 wheel horsepower. The intake manifold on this one, it comes with a skinny intake manifold. It doesn't push a lot of air through. And so a very common mod on these cars is to take the predecessor motor. So this is the M52. You take the M50 intake manifold, which has really, really big runners. And it actually pumps in 40% more air into the motor.
Wow.
Yeah, and without any kind of serious modification except for possibly like a tune on it, you pick up a lot of power. On paper, supposedly it's 20 horsepower to the wheels. Which is a lot when you're only dealing with 180 horsepower out of the box. But
right,
we've all seen these cars shred. They do really good. This one is, I don't know what it is about it, but it's pretty hot. It shreds hard with that 319 diff and then that M50 manifold. It gets it. We actually have a tune from Castle Performance on the way. It'll be here tomorrow. And that is adding another 15 horsepower, and it takes the rev limiter on this car from 6,700 RPMs to 7,200 RPMs.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's a big difference. And from what I've been told from all of the BMW cats that I hang around with, the difference in being able to drift a gear from 67 to 72 is immense. It's like a ton of power and kind of range that you wouldn't normally have. As far as the suspension on the car right now, that's where it's lacking the most. The real kind of magic sauce to this car is that the rear end has a ton of grip. On a lot of these drift cars, what they're doing is they're stiffening out the rear end and welding the rear diff, which gives you the ability to slide and, you know, putting kind of stiff suspension on the rear. You're able to slide the car easily. You'll break the rear wheels, but there's no traction to move you forward. So typically those cars tend to be like pretty slow on track. This car has no rear sway bar. The suspension is set up as such so that you do have a lot of side bite. It's zeroed out as far as camber, so you're getting the most traction to the ground. And it absolutely goes. Yeah, we got to test out a bunch of the stuff that we've done to this car 2 weeks ago at Utah Motorsports Campus, and this car ripped. It was tire smoke, shredding super hard. I've been kind of subscribing to this, like, I don't know if you'd call it purist or whatever it might be, but a lot of people rely on handbrakes in drift cars, and kind of a common misnomer or misconception is that you need a handbrake to drift. This is not connected at all, and this car shreds.
That's not very hooligan.
No, that's the funny thing is everybody is like, oh, you gotta have a hydro e-brake, like a hydraulic e-brake line in there. And actually in Japan, a lot of serious drifting technique is done without the handbrake. And if you ever watch Kiichi Tsuchiya's videos, he doesn't favor the handbrake the most. It's all about technique, how you're throwing in the car, using your brakes, using power, all of these different things together. I decided to not keep it, to keep it without the e-brake and to learn the technique. So I've been learning a lot of different weight transfer techniques, brake drifting, using just a brake to drop the front end of the car and push the rear end out. It's been a lot more difficult, I will say. I've driven a lot of drift cars that have a hydraulic e-brake, and it is easy to get the car to initiate. But this is fun, and it's a little more dangerous, so it's a little more up my alley.
Why don't you show us under the hood?
Yeah. I haven't replaced the latches on the hood, and they're still bent from the other crash. So they kind of angle this new hood out a different way. So in order to get it to pop, there we go.
I mean, that's a proper drift car, right? Unless you're like factory sponsored.
Yeah. So she's a little dirty in here, but what you have is that motor I was talking about, the M52 B28. This is that intake manifold that comes from the older style of the E36. And the runners on the one before, as I was mentioning, are they honestly look almost half the size. They're tiny. And so that whole mod, my buddy helped me out throwing that together. This is just a uni air filter because we didn't have anything else laying around at the time. That's Part Shop's Max strut brace. And as you can see over here, every part of this was smashed all the way back up underneath this strut tower.
Whoa.
And so, I mean, it's not the cleanest way, but we got the dimensions all correct on the front end, so the geometry is actually all straight.
It's amazing you're able to pull this out too, because that looks like an old man scrotum, honestly.
Yes.
It's smashed up.
That is exactly what it looks like. But we did some reinforcement and welding on the inside of that underneath where you can't see, so it is structurally better. A big thing on these E36s too is they have overheating issues if you don't revamp the cooling system. And so we have a CSF, a really big dual pass radiator, and then tied with that, obviously an electric fan on the back of that.
That's hardwired to run all the time when you're going?
It's actually on a switch. I just turn it on. Honestly, the car with the bigger radiator, it actually stays cool by itself unless you really get into the RPMs. Whenever we're hitting at the track or doing any kind of, I mean, we only drive at the track.
Right.
We're gonna get rid of these garbage coilovers.
Garbage coilovers?
Yes. I won't name the company of what they are, but they're cheap. They're introductory. They lower the car. They do their job.
Right. Got to start somewhere.
Exactly. We're gonna get some hopped up suspension on here. We're talking to a couple coilover companies right now to see if they'll do some sponsorship. I'm going on a thing called Driftweek 6 that's coming up in November. It's an amazing trip that this dude Aaron Losey puts on. Basically what it is about 50 plus drift cars get their cars ready enough to drive on the street for hundreds and hundreds of miles over the course of 2 weeks. And so you end up hitting 9 different tracks and over 100 hours of seat time.
Wow.
But you don't get a chase truck or any kind of trailer or anything.
This is not a $40,000 car, I can tell by the duct tape, but would you tell us how much you paid for this car and give us a little bit of an insight to what it costs to get into something like this or to live this life?
Yeah, so basically this is kind of like a really good starter car as far as drifting is concerned. The drift community has instilled a lot of what we call drift tax. As you would imagine, anything that gets popular starts to get more expensive. This used to be a chassis that you could pick up for literally $2 or $3 grand, and you could find them for $1,500 running and driving with a stick, with the ZF, all that. You can still find these for $4 or $5 grand, even with the good transmission and all that good stuff in them. So they've gone up in price, but they're definitely not out of reach for anyone.
Right, and so you said $6,800 as is with the cage and all that stuff when you got it, before you wrecked it.
Yes, before I wrecked it. Now I'm in it quite a few more bucks. It's a fun thing that doesn't take a ton to get into, but it does take a little bit of time to get used to, but not a ton of money at all.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, you just imagine, you're like, oh, I want to drift. It's got to be so much money. But what about tires, though? Because, so do you just buy used tires all the time? You know the guy at the shop who's got the $20 takeoffs, and you just burn those? And
typically, I do use the burner tires, the scrubs, as we call them. I've kind of found out more recently that even with this lower horsepower of a car, a nicer tire will last you longer than the scrubs. And so it's kind of this catch-22 of like, you can buy a couple sets of like crummy all-season tires, and they do well. Don't get me wrong, even on a car like this, you can make them last an entire drift event for sure. However, when you have the good tires, they last for a really long time. If you heat cycle them correctly, I honestly am more sold on spending money to buy good tires. However, spending money on good tires is not a requirement, and you will still just have just as much fun. You can tread for cheap. You can tread for really cheap if you want to, for sure.
Right, yeah, if you look at your local classifieds and whatnot, often you can find some tires that are got some life. The trick is knowing the guy that's going to put them on for you.
Yes, you gotta have a tire shop buddy. Another kind of big modification that you make to drift cars, and it's not 100% necessary, but it definitely helps a lot, is steering angle. And so on this car we used the next generation of 3 Series. We used the control arms from that, which are a little bit wider. I think they're 30 millimeters wider in the front end, which, as you've seen, the car is kind of like wide and beefy. It looks menacing. But then the angle, so there's all kinds of different ways to get it done, but there's knuckles that are custom that allow you to have a ton of angle. So basically when you're sliding the car sideways, if anybody's driven in the snow or you've ever drifted a car or slid it sideways, you know that a lot of cars spin out very easily. And so that comes from not having a ton of steering angle, because naturally a car doesn't have a lot of angle. So once you get to a certain point where it can push the back end out, then you just spin because there's nowhere else for it to go. But if you throw the back end of the car out and the wheels are able to keep turning sideways, then you can keep the drift sideways, so you get more angle that way. This car has, when I bought it, had 75% angle.
How much angle does a normal car have?
I think, don't quote me on this, this might be a in the comments thing, you're gonna hose me, but I think like 35 degrees, 45 degrees-ish of angle.
Bullshit.
Yeah. But yeah, it's kind of a crucial element. Then you have to get extended tie rods, and there's all kinds of little different tricks to the trade. But once you get into that realm, it can get really expensive for the front end. They make full kits that are bolt-on for these cars, and a lot of drift applications that are like $2,500, and that's just the lower control arms and the tie rods and suspension mounting points and all that good stuff. So
Rad. You know, I like what you're saying, but honestly, I'm getting bored. Will you show me some drifts?
yes.
Let's go.
Yes.
Alright friends, so that's a wrap. Damien, thank you so much for showing us all about your E36 drift car, getting it a little loose for us, sharing your vibes. And friends, I know you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, hit the notifications, and we'll see you at the next one. Damien, you got anything special to say?
Stay hydrated and love each other.
Yes. Love each other. If you got something nasty on your mind, keep it to yourself.
Peace.